Welcome everyone to the Science of Science Fiction. Thank you everyone attending on GenCon Live. Thank you to everyone attending on our live stream. This is our second year doing the GenCon online. Really great event, really awesome to be here. We're big fans of GenCon. We've been doing the Science of Science Fiction at GenCon for, I think this is our 5th year. So we've done it 3 years in person and now the 2 GenCon online years. So my name is Rufus Cochran. I'm the executive director of Indiana Sciences, and we are a science communication nonprofit here in Indianapolis that focuses on bringing science to people in new and engaging ways, especially now in this digital period with folks from all over the country to really cool and engaging science communication stuff to you. So quick housekeeping before we get started. The nonprofit is fully volunteer. We're based here locally. Always really happy to have GenCon in-house, but if you enjoy the type of programming that we create, please follow us at Indiana Sciences on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, all your favorite social media apps. It really helps get the word out and really helps us grow the science communication work that we're doing. Really honored, really excited to have a great guest with us tonight, James Reid, from professor at Dartmouth University. And he is going to be talking about cryptids, I believe. And I will follow that up with a science of science fiction medley. My background is computer science and computer engineering, so you'll see some robotics, you'll see some AI stuff. So without further ado, we're going to roll into our first speaker here, James, and really excited. He's also going to tell you guys a little bit about the awesome podcast that he runs called Science Night that I highly encourage you to check out. And without spoiling anything, without stealing any thunder, I'm going to turn it over to James Reid and let him get us kicked off.
All right. I'm going to share my screen, prepare to be shared with. There you go. And why don't we start from the beginning? So, thank you for having me back to another GenCon, to virtual Indianapolis. Like Rufus said, my name is James Reid. He did give me that professor title that I've been wanting for years, but I am just a humble lab director. But since it's been said online, I think it's true now. So I will be submitting that payroll application to Dartmouth College. So if you were here last year, welcome back. You may remember my critically acclaimed presentation of the anthropology of cryptozoology, It's Probably a Bear, where I talked about how cryptids work their way into modern folklore. This year, I am also going to be talking about that, but changing it ever so slightly so as to make it novel enough to be published again. I'm sure no one has ever done that before. And just like last time, the subtitle will be revealed at the end. Tonight, I'm going to approach the topic of cryptids using an anthropological framework, which is the study of humanity, specifically their evolution and culture. But like fun, I promise not to debate structural functionalism using chupacabra as a case study, or discuss neolocal modernity within post-sedentary Yeti-kin groups using the push-pull factors of colonial British hegemony from 1835 to 1850 as a framework. To all the anthropologists out there, I bet you were not expecting a great game reference in the intro to this talk. And to all of the non-anthropologists watching this, they don't know what those words mean either. What I will talk about is how these creatures work their way into our folklore, how their stories changed over time, and then I am going to do something absolutely ridiculous and hopefully fun. I will create a backstory for my favorite modern cryptid. Think of it as like a science-y world building exercise. So we have to answer the very pressing question of what is a cryptid? A cryptid is very simply just an animal that is claimed to exist, but has never been proven to. Cryptozoology theoretically would be the study of their behavior, structure, classification, and distribution. In reality, cryptozoology by definition cannot actually exist because once a cryptid is proven to actually be a real thing, it falls under the discipline of zoology or biology, which is the study of living animals, living things, that sort of thing. And I know what you're saying. I thought cryptids are fake. And while it's true that the creatures on the screen right now are fantastic beasts that we have no idea how to find, we do in fact have proof of the existence of mermaids, kraken, and sea serpents. We just call them manatees, squid, and oarfish now. And fun fact, based on Christopher Columbus's own writing, he probably almost definitely tried to engage in, we'll say, diplomatic relations with a manatee. Also note how these are all sea creatures. And I hate to break it to you, but if you think you're going to encounter a cryptid on land, it's probably a bear. It's just like really unlikely that something as big as a Yeti or a Bigfoot has yet to be discovered. However, there is proof potentially of something like that happening into our past. Gigantopithecus is an ancestor of modern orangutans that lived in China and Southeast Asia a really, really long time ago. There is some debate as to its size, but it likely came in over 9 feet tall and weighed about 600 pounds, which is big, like really big. Like if you stumble, I am not that big, I would be horrified. There's also some debate as to when it went extinct, but some evidence suggests it could have coexisted with humans briefly. If you look at the image on the left, let me turn my thing into a laser pointer. If you look at the image on the left here, you can see how big a Gigantopithecus skull was in relation to a modern anatomical human. Now, lots of cryptid hunters would make the leap that some members of these species survive to this day in the Bigfoot Yeti group, but this is almost definitely not the case. However, I can't deny that if a human did ever stumble across a Gigantopithecus sometime well into the past, it would be alarming to say the least. And if that person was anything like me, they would never shut up about it, ever, for the rest of their lives. So while I'm not prepared to submit Gigantopithecus as evidence for the Bigfoot or the Yeti in real life, I do see the possibility of this creature entering into the folklore, capable of traveling through time and space to this very moment. So, to the person that stumbled upon a Gigantopithecus and lived to tell the tale, we salute you. For the rest of the night, we'll be talking about the cryptids that remain hidden. Since we can no longer rely on the realms of biological anthropology, we will pick up the toolkit of cultural anthropology. Everyone's really excited about that, I can tell. The cryptids of folklore and myth are fascinating and fantastical creatures. They are the things that mark the edge of the map. They are the monsters in Here There Be Monsters. They are enigmatic things that capture our imagination and warn us about the consequences of venturing too far from the norms of civilization. While there is a lot of justified criticism about his scientific technique, I think the man pictured here, Bernard Heuvelmans, his definition of a cryptid is pretty good. He states that a cryptid must contain one trait that is truly singular, striking, emotionally upsetting, and thus capable of mythification. Going off his own definition, I think this image of Bernard Hovelman's and his friends is probably a cryptid because I am emotionally upset for sure. And now that we've defined what a cryptid is, let's talk about how they work their way into our culture and how they change over time. Ooh. Many of the most well-known cryptids began as figures in indigenous culture. And while there is a ton of variation in each culture, they tend to initially serve as a beginning that is tasked, or as a being that is tasked with protecting something. It's protecting either something from or for that indigenous original culture. Now, the Lenape culture originally lived in the area that now consists of New Jersey and parts of Pennsylvania and New York. Their culture included a masked figure that we see here on the left that is known as Misingwe. And they acted as the keeper of game animals in their hunting grounds. And the most striking characteristic of Misingwe is that distinct black and red carved wooden mask that it would wear. It's kind of like a large kind of Bigfoot looking thing that would wear this carved mask. And then also the Lenape people would carve this mask into trees in areas that they wanted to ward off other groups from. And on the right, the highland Nepalese and Tibetan culture, specifically the Sherpa, which I will stress right here that Sherpa is a culture, not an occupation. They have something called the Meto Kangmi, or we call the Yeti, which protected the sacred peaks of the Himalaya. However, Western culture would probably have you think that this was a lot more important than is reality for that region. Now, especially in colonial North America, the strict religious and governmental hierarchy was imposed to make sure that the community survived. It has been noted that it has to be like, we got to talk about this. They didn't try to like adapt or anything. They just tried to make Britain happen in the New World. So that's, I guess, a conversation for another time. Now, on the left, we have the popular colonial depiction of the Jersey Devil, whose look was inspired by Misingwe, but specifically it's like a striped thing, and that is really what they took from the Misingwe lore. And then they mixed it with a demon from European folklore. The story goes that a woman in Leeds, New Jersey, while giving birth to her 13th child, and I am sure that the 13th is very important to the tale, exclaimed, "Let this one be a devil." And it was. After birth, the seemingly normal looking baby began to morph into a demonic creature with the head of a goat, the body of a horse, and the wings of a bat. And this really did a good job at keeping young children in line and from wandering too far into the Pine Barrens. Fun fact, at one time there was a traveling exhibition in the region, so New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, that boasted a real Jersey Devil. That's really exciting. We have confirmation of a Jersey Devil. It was actually a kangaroo painted in stripes with rings attached to its back, and the keepers would occasionally poke it with a nail attached to a stick so that would jump around and scream a lot. So go humans. The Yeti on the right morphed into what we call the abominable snowmen when British explorer C.K. Howard Bury reported seeing something while surveying Everest and incorrectly translated his Sherpa guide's Metokangmi as Mechkangmi, which changed the meaning from wild man to filthy man. And the abominable snowman is a member of the Bigfoot slash hairy man trope, including things like Sasquatch and that sort of thing. They are part of what I would call like the most colonial thing ever. and that is creating an other in the wilderness, because the British loved having something that is just human enough to be transposed onto some of the more remote indigenous cultures, which is super depressing to think about when we're riding like the Matterhorn or Expedition Everest at Disney. The final form is turning into marketing material. And just as like a quick side note, apparently the NHL has a thing for cryptids. You can see Masingwe here on the left, Metokangmi here on the right. They are alive and well as the mascots for the New Jersey Devils and the Colorado Avalanche. Although I've seen also that the Colorado Avalanche have apparently changed their mascot to a rabbit, which I don't know. What are we doing? What are we doing in Colorado? Let's get the things together and get the Yeti back into that costume. This is how most of us interact with cryptids. I personally live in Vermont now, and Lake Champlain is patrolled by the friendly Champ. And while we are now in virtual Indiana, real Indiana has lots of cryptids all over the place, from the Meshakenbak in Lake Manitou to the Pukwudgies of Madison County. And Pukwudgies are like little, we've talked about these big cryptids, but these are like little things that will either bring you trinkets or take trinkets away from you, depending on how you interact with them, I'm assuming. Now, I've really just scratched the surface here, and you can see how most of the stories that we hear about a cryptid are only part of a full history. You know, you may have heard a portion of the Jersey Devil tale and how that came apart, like a woman's 13th child, she's screaming because she's got 13 children in the colonial era. But they usually don't go far back into the lore and make that correct connection to the original indigenous culture. And you can use this idea that lore changes over time as it comes in contact with other cultures, or just evolves over time when building your own world to add a layer of depth and complexity, which is what we're all trying to do, right? We're here at GenCon. We're trying to create these rich and wonderful worlds for our players. And to prove this concept, I am going to weave a tapestry of a backstory for my favorite cryptid, which will be revealed at the end of this little jaunt back into the past. Now, for our cryptid's backstory, I am absolutely not going to co-opt any non-European indigenous traditions. I'm just not going to do it. Instead, I will be using trolls from Norse and Germanic folklore. These, we'll say interesting creatures, live far away from humans, and they inhabited either the forests, mountains, or swamps of Scandinavia and continental Europe. The word troll comes from a lot of different places. What I've found to be most believable is that it comes from a Proto-Germanic word for fiend or demon, and it is just troll. And they keep us out of the wild places with threats of eating us. As this area became more Christianized, they served as the reminder of the old gods. They specifically would not be Christian creatures. They would, in fact, hunt out people who had adopted Christianity as their faith. So they were the reminder of the old gods, and they either protected, depending on how you read it, they either protected or just inhabited these once sacred spaces. So either they were protecting a sacred space to the old religion, or they were used as a way to dehumanize the people who still had those beliefs in a Christian context. Obviously, this is a huge oversimplification of troll folklore. There are people with PhDs that just go into troll folklore in Scandinavia and Germany. I only have so much time, so we're going to keep it at this, and we're going to get to know the backstory of my favorite cryptid. So here we have our subject in their original form. He is called the Gifrosion. derived from the High German word verb meaning to freeze. He is solitary, nearly impossible to damage, and ferociously territorial. Normally found in the dead of winter, traveling through the Black Forest region of Germany, their long, thick fur, especially on their face, almost gives the appearance of an old man with a beard and cape. Their robust upper bodies make them walk with the appearance of a hunch, made more apparent by their affinity for carrying long clubs that give the unwary an impression of a simple cane or walking stick. They patrol the rivers and dark places of the forest, keeping intruders away from their sacred gathering places. The fact that they're only seen alone or in pairs would make one think that they're loners. In fact, they have an ancient and rich culture, communicating status, group affiliation, even kinship with their ornate headpieces they create over a lifetime. But beware, for few that come across the gathering of a Gafrosian become little more than an opportunity to add human bone to their ornamentation. Outcasts living on the fringe of society regularly live trinkets on the outside of their houses in the winter in hopes that the Gafrosian will take it and move along, much like we will move along forward in time. Our fierce friend from the German Black Forest has abandoned Europe and moved across the Atlantic to Pennsylvania. As German immigrants settled the valleys of central Pennsylvania, the area I am originally from, they brought their folklore with them, fitting it onto the new horrors that awaited them in coal country. I always remember my grandparents warning me of the Grecs. Its name derived from the Pennsylvania German word for screaming. Its appearance is similar to, but legally distinct from, the Bellschnickel pictured here. The Grecs first would come in the night and take disobedient children back to his lair, inside the many abandoned coal mines in the area. Maybe the Grecs is a wild man that abandoned polite society, or perhaps the German miners found something other than anthracite in the deep places of the Black Hills. All we know for sure is that when you see a light high on the mountain, the Grecs is awakened. Now that we have created the bare bones of the lore for our modern cryptid, it is probably time for the big reveal. It is obviously Gritty, the beloved mascot of the Philadelphia Flyers, taking his final form as NHL marketing material. This is by far my favorite cryptid. I mean, like, look at him. I would absolutely say that Gritty is unexpected, paradoxical, striking, emotionally upsetting, thus worthy of mythification. It strikes maybe not like fear, but definitely a feeling of deep unpleasantness into the hearts of opposing players and fans, and he protects the home ice from invaders. But he also serves as a symbol of hope and perseverance to the underdogs living in Philadelphia, and a symbol of what is going on in Philly to the rest of the world. Now, it's very obvious that I had some fun with this topic, but you can see how the idea, these ideas, they like move through a culture, they evolve over time, they change when they come into contact with other cultures. Most of what cultural anthropology is doing is stuff like this. They want to learn about how different groups of humans interact and how interactions cause changes within one culture or another, and how things move forward into the future. And we can use these same tools in world building, and it really fleshes out a backstory. So with that, I really hope that you enjoyed this completely fresh and not in any way derivative of last year's presentation. The Anthropology of Cryptozoology, the one with Gritty. Now, if you enjoyed this presentation, I have a podcast, because of course I have a podcast. Why wouldn't I have a podcast? It's called Science Night, and it comes out every other week. And we talk to people involved with science about their work, how they got there, and what they do when they're not doing science, because spoilers, we're just people. And what we've also started doing is talking about science news and discoveries. So head over to scienite.com and check it out. And relevant to tonight's crowd, the crowd of GenCon, next week's episode coming out next Friday features an interview with David J. Peterson. And if you don't know who that is, he is a language constructor that worked on Game of Thrones, The Witcher, pretty much everything you've heard of in the past 10 years that has a constructed language. He increased the Dothraki language and the Valyrian language for Game of Thrones, and most importantly, and absolutely underratedly, he was the person who created the languages and a lot of the cultures in the such underrated show Defiance from the Sci-Fi Channel from years ago. And we actually talked about the show Defiance at length. So check that out next week when we talk with David J. Peterson. And with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. If it allows me to stop sharing my screen. There we go.
Hey, there we go. Now I unmuted myself. All right, so let me get back to screen sharing here. All right, so can you hear me okay, James? Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, cool. All right, so James, great talk. It is always fascinating to hear about gridding. It is, cryptids are fantastic, and it is a great and fun, engaging topic. If you have questions, send them to us in the chat, or if you're on the live stream, just post them as a response to the video, and we'll make sure that we ask them at the end. So originally tonight we had another speaker who couldn't make it. So I've got a special double feature, a kind of a longer talk here on the science of science fiction. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of science fiction itself, and then talk about examples of, from my lens as a computer engineer, different technologies that we've seen predicted in science fiction and that have come to life. Just a very brief overview of myself. I'm a computer engineer and a native Hoosier, creator of the robotics team DankBots, with its own maybe cryptid past. Dank being the German word denken, the verb to think, robot being a word for an automated being. So DankBots, thinking machines. It's fun to play with words and with etymology. And then I am the founder and executive director of Indiana Sciences. So my background, mechatronics, automated systems, and I currently work in machine learning and AI systems. And if there's any FIRST robotics folks out in the crowd, been mentoring in that program for over a decade. Really cool stuff. So the talk that I am going to give here on the science of science fiction, we're really going to talk about the background and explore some of the history of science fiction, discover things in science fiction that went from ideas to reality, and hopefully you learn something new, you get inspired to check out some new stuff. And really the goal of our talk here is to just hit you with a little bit of wonder. And hopefully at the end we will have achieved that. So looking at kind of the roots.
Are you listening to a podcast right now?
A stream right now, yeah. I was hoping to be here, but like before it started, but it wasn't, so I had to like drive and miss like 10 minutes.
Hey, James, can you help me mute somebody real quick?
No curses on my work because they took forever to actually let me go.
Okay.
Toss the characters this way.
Hey, James, can you
All right.
help me
Somebody?
get the,
Oh, characters. Oh, the character was-
Now just unmute yourself and you'll be good.
All right. Hey, there we go. Hey, it's live internet. It's a live program. So thank you for the folks who just joined us. Great to have you along. Open up a cold one and enjoy it. Hopefully it's one of the Genevieve beers that Sun King makes. So hopping back into the talk, luckily we're right here at the beginning. The roots of science fiction. We can really look at the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment as two really the key component parts of how we get to science fiction, because what they really do is they help us look at the world in a new way with a set of rules that allow us to really understand how this natural world around us operates. And at the same time, during the Enlightenment, we were really taking our idea of knowledge and tying it in with those ideas of liberty, progress, of these ideas of the human condition. And so these two tools together really help us take a new perspective on how we view the world around us and build the knowledge that we have from the past into more and more knowledge. So one of my favorite quotes, if I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. A fantastic quote by Sir Isaac Newton, and not just a general quote, but as you look at the way that science fiction grows over the years, you can really see how not just the technical knowledge, the physical knowledge of the world around us grows in this way, but also the way that we're building our fiction as we move along. So some of the early days of science fiction are actually from some of the original forerunners of the new science of science and the scientific revolution. So Sir Francis Bacon writes New Atlantis in 1627, which is this vision of a future of human discovery and knowledge, really expressing this ideal future for humankind. And Sir Francis Bacon is also the person who formalized the scientific method. And then Johannes Kepler in 1634 writes Somnium, which is a really interesting, it's a detailed and imaginative description of how the Earth might look from the moon. And it's considered really also kind of the first scientific treatise on lunar astronomy, right? Which is a really interesting take on someone who's so influential in our view of the world and our understanding of the way that planetary bodies move. And then what's really awesome, looking down at Voltaire's Micro Magnus, it's this recounting of a visit to Earth from a being that circles a different star and his companion from the planet Saturn. And what this really does, if you're familiar with Voltaire's work, it's this technique where you write about an outsider's perspective and you use it to comment on topics in culture, right? Because if you just come out and say, hey, the king's dumb and he sucks and I don't like him, the next thing that happens is you're on one of those blocks and they're chopping off your head, right? So Voltaire and other authors at this time used this technique to write from an outsider's perspective, or you think about Candide, right? It's this very naive person who fumbles through these different areas, and from his naivety gains a very unique perspective, and people have an affinity for him and talk to him about things, right? And it really tells you about the world, and you can make this commentary on the society that you're in without directly questioning the powers that be, right? And this idea, similar to Kepler's Somnium, right, talking about an outsider's perspective, it's very powerful from a scientific perspective, right? To look at things in new ways, which is really engaging and really fascinating to do. And, a great example of this, if you're familiar, is a little comic that you may have seen from Nathan Pyle. And so this is a good example, right, of looking at the world through fresh eyes to understand how we interact with the natural world around us. Somebody who was really great at this, by the way, was Richard Feynman. And so Feynman talks a lot about different stories and about taking a different perspective. And one example that he has is a story he tells where he says, imagine aliens fly to our planet. They're looking down as the planet rotates and the sun is breaking, across the planet. And everywhere that the day breaks across this world, these ape creatures wake up and they go to this, some kind of ceremony room in their house, and they pull out these small, sticks, and they put them in their mouth and shake them around for about the same, amount of time every single morning. And it must be some kind of, worship of of a solar deity, because of the precision with which this ape species does this every time, right? And it's looking at the rituals and the things that we do and what those look like from an outside perspective. And it can really break up the way that we see the world, and allow us to discover new things about who we are and what we do. Another couple of great news, we move into this next period, right, where we start to move in more formally what is, will be called science fiction, right? This early fiction. Of course, you've got Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, an amazing piece of fiction, as our advancements in medical technology and our understanding of anatomy in the physical body, right, expand. We start to experiment with these ideas of what are these different organs, these parts, these constituent areas. Can we put them back in different ways? Can we create new things? Really fascinating exploration. And then as we hop down, another really cool example, actually Edgar Allan Poe, is the Great Moon Hoax. And why this isn't to the level that War of the Worlds was. This was actually a pretty fascinating, I guess we could say maybe a prank, where there was a series of articles printed in a New York newspaper called The Sun, I believe. And these articles are supposedly about the discovery of life on the moon, right? And this goes hand in hand with the advancements in technology, where we are just now having access to telescopes in a way where we can see the surface of the moon, and we can see the way that there are these different shapes and patterns on it. And this caused a really large, shakeup with people. Not, of course, the level of World of Worlds in that radio production, but very interesting looking at that idea of what happens when we do find that life that's out there. And then, of course, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And then we get down to H.G. Wells. Just a lot of really fascinating things in his different pieces of science fiction. But the one I will focus on, as we're talking about technology and science fiction, right, is in World of Worlds. A lot of technology that we will later see in World War I and World War II are two level kind of predicted and looked at in this, especially the idea of tanks and bombers, right? The machinery with which the aliens move through unstopped by human forces are really what will become tanks, and are really fascinating to see that tactical advantage, especially with the dive bombers, the alien ships that are shooting down, make it really reminiscent of the blitzkrieg that happens about 4 decades later in mainland Europe, right? And so that idea of looking forward in time, seeing what we currently have, and really projecting it into the future was something H.G. Wells was really was very good at. So if we take this whole idea of looking at the world from these different perspectives, right? If we fast forward just a little bit and grab a quote that's really fascinating. There's actually a quote from Edgar Mitchell, who is an Apollo astronaut, that I'll quote back, and I'll have to edit it a little bit because I know we've got a all ages audience here. But what he says is he's gone into space and he's looking back at the Earth from space. He says, from out here on the moon, international politics looks so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck, drag him 250,000 miles out and say, look at that, you son of a beep, right? Really, that perspective that you get from seeing the Earth from the moon. There's the moonrise photo that's very influential, very powerful to help us see our perspective in the universe. Then, of course, everyone is probably familiar with the pale blue dot image. Carl Sagan can do much more justice if you listen to recordings of him talking about it. But it's really, as Voyager was going past, turned around, and they see this faint blue dot in a small bit of dust reflecting light from the sun, and that little dot was Earth, right? And we've never seen it so small and insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And that's what, as we start to have these advances in technologies in the late 1800s, we get to have our world both large and small, right? We've got microscopes and telescope technologies becoming more accessible, more impactful. And we see the world that's at the microscopic level growing past anything we could have imagined. And we're looking out in space and we're seeing the world on the macro scale growing greater than anything we could have imagined. And it's really changing the way that humans view the world around them. It's really opening up our minds to new possibilities, right, through the advancements in science and technology. So as we move into the golden age, not my term, just a term that I guess historians use, what the internet tells me, the golden age of science fiction. The actual, beginning of the term science fiction comes in 26 with Hugo Gernsback and Hugo Award, the Nebula Awards and stuff. You look at those prizes. The amazing stories, which were the pulp fiction, and they had originally actually called it scientifiction instead of science fiction. The scientifiction that didn't catch on, right? Because it's hard for you and me to say. But those pulp stories were really foundational in the growth of science fiction. And then you kind of see the period with Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, a lot of the shows from the 50s of, Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, all really fascinating stuff. And if you look, at the work with Clarke, the foundation for 2001: A Space Odyssey comes from The Sentinel, one of his books in 1948. It was about an artifact left on Earth's moon by an ancient alien species, and it was transmitting signals into space as kind of a warning for possible intelligent species that might develop on Earth. What the warning was, it leaves vague, right? Sometimes the monster not seen or the disaster not experienced is more terrifying than the one drawn out in front of you, right? But that period of very influential, very powerful science fiction coming out. But also what you're seeing in this period is the beginning of the nuclear age, right? At the end of this. And Isaac Asimov has a really amazing quote about this. And it'll sound weird, but follow it. And he said the dropping of the atomic bomb in 1945 made science fiction respectable to the general public. And really what it was is, before it's, kind of this thing, it's in pulp magazines, there's, these stories, and it's kind of seen as, it's a fun thing for kids or, whatever. But when society was so foundationally shook by the explosion of the atomic bomb, the awesome power that society saw harnessed by science, it really changed the game in science fiction. And that's where you have a really strong drive, hard science fiction, and a lot of more dystopian science fiction coming out of the post-World War II era. Little quote here: "It's good to renew one's wonder," said the philosopher. "Space travel has again made children of us all." And as we go into this period, now that we're leaving the 50s, we're going into the space race. You really see the space race ignite a new wonder in humanity of what's possible and what we can achieve. So as we move into the new wave, a couple of the really influential classics here that I'll point out. First, Starship Troopers, looking at that bridge between technology and, again, warfare. Starship Troopers actually has exoskeletons for military use, so not quite Sigourney Weaver and Aliens, knocking them out with the suit, but more the idea of powered exoskeletons to help movement and reduce fatigue. A cool side note on this, Mitsubishi in Japan, I believe, has these for a lot of their factory workers. So as they're lifting up boxes and moving things, there's a simple kind of hip to back joint that is powered and has feedback. So as you start to move, it will assist you as you sit down and power you as you stand up to reduce the strain on your lower back and on your hips. Really, really fascinating stuff. And then also, hopping down to Do Androids Dream of Electric Sleep? One of the sources for Blade Runner, right? Very, very influential book. And then William Gibson's Neuromancer, right? Kind of the beginning of the cyberpunk term, helped coin, really popularize the term cyberspace, and really fascinating, dystopian look at the digital world, right? That was coming. So really, really fascinating stuff. And then William Gibson has one of the best quotes that I use all the time, is that the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed, right? And this is a really powerful quote. I think if you've ever seen, there's an old science fiction movie with Brad Pitt called Elysium, and it takes place. You start in a blown out, ravaged, post-apocalyptic Los Angeles, right? Like most good post-apocalyptic movies, and the folks that live on the earth don't have very good access to healthcare. I don't know why they need to sit in the post-apocalyptic period to make that point, but it stands for science fiction, right? And the people who live in these space stations that are orbiting the Earth, the ultra rich, right? They have basically these kind of like beds they can just lay back in, and it can scan them and do any kind of surgery, any kind of advanced procedure in curing disease that they basically have. So Matt Damon's daughter, gets hurt, gets sick, and the movie's about him fighting and sneaking his way up there to save his daughter's life, right? And that's one of the things we look at technologies, especially in healthcare, right? We have very advanced treatments that are cost prohibitive for a lot of people to get to. We have a lot of very almost standard care at this point that is very difficult for people to get access to if they don't have high enough levels of health insurance, other things like that, right? Not talking political, just talking kind of the facts of the system that we operate within. And so looking at these advances in technology, how do you get them to people and make them more accessible so that they serve the common good, right? So Gibson, guy really far ahead this time, really cool stuff. Looking at that. So let's pass this prologue, right? So we're going to hop forward. Next kind of section of this presentation, what we're really going to look at are technologies from our everyday lives that exist today that were kind of foreseen, checked out, pushed forward in science fiction. So my favorite one that I love to start with is the Babelfish, or the universal translator from Star Trek, right? I've got this really cool device in my pocket that I can just, speak any language, and then it can translate it into another language. So I can say, hello, how are you doing? And then my phone will say, oh, okay. Hey, this is live, so what can you do? So will you say it? Pretty please? Okay, wait, no. You gotta turn the volume on. Well, live demos, they get you every time.
안녕하세요. 어떻게 지내세요?
Yeah, there we go. So I'll try this one more time. I'll even pick a different language, right? So I'll just into my phone, I will say, hello, how are you doing? And then it will say,
Ciao, come va?
so in my pocket is a little device that in real time can translate what I'm saying in one language into another one, which allows you to translate and speak almost in real time with another person, which is absolutely fascinating. It's something, from the 60s and 70s, we talked about, and it is a near reality today. My other favorite one, like to start off with the easy ones, are replicators, right? You can hop online and for under $100, get a replicator and put it on your desk, right? They're 3D printers. And the thing that's so amazing about 3D printers that I try and invoke a little wonder here is someone on the other side of the planet can have an idea and say, man, I really want to be able to take my Schick Octagon Octo Super Blade razors and use them on kind of any handle, right? I don't have to buy a really expensive shaver. And so what if I could design and create a small bracket that allowed the expensive Schick blades to be used on any kind of handle, so I didn't have to buy their expensive thing. Well, if they sit down and design that in a computer-aided design software, so in CAD, they can create that, and then that idea that was in their brain, they pull it out, they put it in CAD, and then they can print it and have it literally materialize beside them, right? That's super cool. But the way this becomes science fiction, right, is they can take that idea out of their brain, they can CAD it up, they can put it on a place like Thingiverse, and then someone on the opposite side of the planet who's having that same problem can download that file and have it materialize beside them from their 3D printer, right? That open sharing of knowledge, that free and open source design allows people who don't speak the same language, who live in completely different cultures, to share physical things that they have pulled out of their mind. And to me, that's just absolutely insane. And it reminds me every day that we live in the future. Just to also put a little cherry on top, in 2019, astronauts on the International Space Station 3D printed food, a meat product. They said it tastes like chicken. I believe them. So the next thing one of the crown jewels of fantasy. So just not in science fiction, but also in fantasy, right? Our invisibility cloaks. This one, pretty low hanging fruit for science and technology. What the Russians were able to do back in 2011, they put cameras facing behind them, and they put some nice display systems on the other side and allowed them to basically just project onto themselves what was behind them, essentially from the point of view of planes or any kind of long distance viewing could make their tanks invisible. The other nice trick you could do is you can get, usually it's a couple of mirrors, right? But you can also do this with sheets of material that have multiple bins in the material, and you can get the point of parallax behind the object that you want to hide, and essentially make the thing right up against it invisible, but it takes a large sheet. But a really cool, the Russians in 2011, they put e-ink on the side of the tank, took video behind them, and just totally covered it up, which is pretty fascinating. So the next thing I'm going to talk about here is a little Deep Space Nine, which I am a Trekkie. I'm a big Star Trek fan. So there's an episode in Deep Space Nine called Explorers, where Captain Sisko finds this writing of an old ship that the Cardassians, not the Kardashians, the Cardassians, had found, that was, the Bajorans had basically ridden this ancient kind of ship on Starlight and made it all the way over to Cardassian space before really spaceships should have been invented, right? And so it was this idea of this kind of solar sailor that they had built with ancient technologies. And you think, oh, that's kind of interesting. Is that even a real possibility? Well, super cool. This was actually done by the Planetary Society in 2019. They built a solar sail and launched it in July 31st, 2019. And the idea is really simple, but it's very powerful. So what they do is they take a large piece of very thin reflective material, and every photon that's coming off the sun is just the smallest little push of energy into this. And so it starts off very, very slowly, but because there isn't friction in space, every little bit of energy, every little photon that blasts this increases its speed. So by the time it gets to the edge of our galaxy to take off and break off into the place outside of our solar system, it is going at a really good clip, right? So, talked about this kind of the solar sail idea in 1995, and in 2019, we've got one happening IRL, right, in real life. So another one that's actually super amazing, if you read the book Ender's Game, and they've got a movie of it too, right? There's this device called the Ansible. And what this device does is it allows an alien species to communicate instantaneously across the entire galaxy, right? And this technology gives them a huge strategic advantage, and they're able to just destroy humans in combat. And so we have to end up stealing it, blah, 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 right? Well, this isn't science fiction. This real-time instant communication was actually proven in 2017 when China was able to get 2 quantum entangled bits to communicate information from a satellite orbiting the planet back down to Earth instantaneously, right? And so what this means is when you have 2 quantumly entangled bits, what that means is these 2 bits, no matter where they're at in the universe, if one moves, the other one will move in exactly the same way at exactly the same time. So what that means is instantaneous communication with no ability to intercept it, right? So from a safety and intelligence standpoint, this is one of the most powerful things we have discovered, because it's completely uninterceptable, secure communication, right? You don't need to encrypt it. You don't need anything. It's literally only the two bits can understand and receive the information. And why this is so powerful, right? It's a cool example in World War II when radio operators needed to get information to Allied soldiers behind enemy lines in Germany. What they would do is they would actually take their transmitters and focus them on the moon and bounce the signal off of the moon down back to the Earth. So the reason this is very clever and very powerful, right, is if you imagine kind of a cone, when you send out your signal, you're sending out a radio broadcast wave, electromagnetic waves kind of going out in the cone. Well, when you hit an object and bounce off of it, especially if it's a sphere, you have a focus signal back down that's only part of that wave reflected back down in a concentrated point. And so what that allowed them to do is when they bounced the signal off the moon back into the ground, they could get an area a little less than a mile and have the signal only able to be picked up in that area. So they could bounce and get near hidden communication down to a team on the ground. So there wasn't a chance to intercept it as you just broadcast it, over the area. So that desire to get uninterceptable communication has pushed us to really strong links. And now with spooky action in the distance, that's the physicist term, not mine. They came up with it, and I trust them. We can have instantaneous, uninterceptable communication. So keeping the flow going along, going to keep it a little Star Trek here, come back to that. It's a really cool episode in the original series called The Cloud Miners, right? And this is this idea of the science catching up with the reality. The crew comes by and there's this special mineral that they need to pick up from this planet that helps fuel their engines. And they come to a planet where the ruling class lives in these clouds, right? And they're slowed down though because there are a group of terrorists that are attacking the city and breaking up their mining operations, right? And so eventually Kirk and Spock try to go down to the planet, find out what's going on, and they're caught and taken as hostages by these groups. And what the cloud miners, the folks in the cloud say is, these people that work down in the mines, they're tons of terrorists. They're aggressive. They're like a subspecies. Like they're super bad, right? And of course, they have the best headgear for being such buttheads. But they say, you can't trust these folks. They're not. You can't negotiate with them. We're just going to have to blow them up, right? But what Kirk and Spock find when they're down there is that these folks have high concentrations of the metal that they're mining in their blood, which is causing them to be very aggressive and causing them to have an inability to focus. What we found in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, is what the concentration of lead in the bodies of especially children does during their development, and what that causes in a decrease in their stages of development. So a study from 79 showed that for every 5 micrograms per deciliter increase in blood lead levels early in life, there was an associated 1.6 point drop in IQ by the time those children reached 38, as well as issues found with reasoning and working memory and memory recall, right? So that lead poisoning, especially in children, was found to cause these different problems in development, right? And so we're seeing, these things predicted in science fiction as we have the very early studies, we have the early breakthrough, this tool of science fiction to communicate what that looks like and how that can be perceived to inform people of what we can do about that. And then we do get in 1992 what was the name of it? The Residential Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act, something definitely named by a government committee, right? But it was to reduce lead paint and other ways that lead was getting introduced to children in the environments. So hopping over another quick, easy one, right? If you've read Isaac Asimov's Prelude to Foundation, they've got the food vats on Trantor, where there's just a large concoction of algae farms that grow a synthetic nutrient paste or foam that is brought up and flavored and then packaged into all of the foods that people eat, right? And 2019, the Impossible Whopper kicked off at Burger King, right? So that idea of growing meat alternatives or food alternatives with, algae or some kind of like very easy to produce product and then flavoring it afterwards to meet demands of rising populations, right? A common theme in a lot of science fiction. And then hopping back to Star Trek, another neat one here. If you've seen Author or the amazing episode, The Measure of a Man, where they want to study data by taking out his positronic brain and dissecting it to understand how Professor Sung was able to create a one-of-a-kind android like Data. It will, of course, kill him. And so Picard has to argue why Data has rights just like any other living creature, because he is a unique sentient being and shouldn't be able to be disassembled like a piece of machinery owned by the Federation. He should instead be treated like a sentient life form with all the rights that entails, right? Well, sovereignty and citizenship of a mechatronic being in society, we already did it. In 2017, Saudi Arabia granted citizenship to the robot Sophie on October 26th. So check, cross that. AI is already here and has citizenship in Saudi Arabia. I will give the caveat that this was seen as more of a PR move to grow the AI industry and the startup moves that Saudi Arabia is trying to make. But nonetheless, very cool precedent, very interesting movement in those spaces. And so just because a lot of things are super positive, I'll just toss in 1984 and the new Facebook TV, the Facebook glasses that I just saw on the news yesterday. So you can live stream everything back in real time. Looking at that idea in 1984, where they're doing the exercise in the morning and the TV has the camera and you're not doing your calisthenics, it yells at you and tells you, hey, number 4, 5, 7, whatever, why aren't you doing your, calisthenics? Folks probably have a Peloton bike. They probably have a Siri. They probably have an OK Google thing. I'm probably triggering all of your systems right now. Whatever the Bing one is, Cortana, right? But a lot of these connected IoT systems, voice activated systems, there are privacy concerns, right? And there are these different things, especially, for example, with like Ring cameras, new deal will attempt to deal with Amazon and local police authorities to send information back or to have different capabilities sent back to local governments, right? So things that are on the cutting edge of technology, we've seen those kind of foretold in different science fiction, right? But that's just an aside. We'll hop back to the cool stuff. Mind games. If you've seen this in The Next Generation or in Deep Space Nine, there are these different games that you can control just by putting on either a headset or just using your mind, right, to control something. And this technology is also not like super crazy. We have this in 2019. There was the first successful non-invasive controlling of a robotic arm, and there's just a good chunk of episodes, especially in The Next Generation of Joy of the Forge, where he's interfacing with different systems and using his mind because of the unique system that was built to replace his eyes, and sending that data and controlling something remotely. And we have those non-invasive systems today, which is really cool. And what I'll hop on, just to keep it on Joy of the Forge, is one of my favorite Star Trek characters, one of my favorite science fiction characters. The idea of giving someone back their sight, right? This is really, really cool stuff, because in 2009, there's a really cool technology that was developed where you'd sit on a person who was blind could sit on a set of set of glasses that had a camera on it, right? And what would happen is the image in front of them would be processed, and a small set of electrodes would be put on your tongue, and it made a small grid, and it would shock your tongue based on the image in front of you. And what they found is they could hijack that data input from your tongue into your brain. And after about a week of training with this, the participants found that they would see a monochrome image, grayscale image in front of them of the thing that the camera was processing. So they could reach and pick something up. They could avoid obstacles by taking that data pathway through your tongue, hot wiring it with this kind of think of the putting a battery, D battery on your tongue and shocking yourself, that kind of idea, and rewire your brain to take that input as visual sensory input, right? And what's so cool about this, right, is it's giving sight back to the blind. And this is personally very powerful for me, for example, because I love the character Joy of the Forge, because a handful of years back, I got diagnosed with a condition, and I'll just tell a quick story. I was driving around, never had any vision problems in my life, has always had perfect vision. Then I started to notice, things were harder to focus on, things at a distance I couldn't quite make out. Lights would flare when I'd be driving at night, and I'd see, flares basically instead of, nice little tail lights. And so I went to the optometrist. They start running the machine, checking my eyes, and something you never want to hear when you're at a doctor's office. The person's using the machine. It's going and they say, I'm gonna have to go get the doctor because something's wrong with the machine. Oh, well, that's not great. So they take me back and they set me down, and the optometrist says, you're probably coming in and thinking you were just going to get glasses, but what we found is you have a condition called keratoconus. And so this is a degenerative eye condition. It's not genetic, it's not environmental. We don't know what causes it, but it just happens to usually people between the ages of 25 and 35, where your cornea starts to thin, your eye bulges a little bit. Instead of being a nice surface to bounce light back, it cones out and diffracts the light, so that all your vision is blurred. I said, well, that's cool. She said, well, what's even cooler is that there's no cure for it. And we don't know that much about it. I said, well, awesome. She said, but there is an experimental treatment. And I was prepared to go, wherever to not go blind, because it's a degenerative condition that continues to get worse. And I was very fortunate that the doctors who created this technique were here in Indianapolis. Another reason why I'm really proud of my city and my state, right, they had created an experimental procedure to scrape off a little bit of your cornea, drop a, basically think of a concoction, right, a material, metamaterial on your eye, blast it with a laser and harden and reshape your cornea. So I had this procedure done in both of my eyes, and I actually went from being legally blind in one of my eyes and nearly blind in the other to having almost my full vision back within about a year, right? And I think it's just absolutely fascinating that we live in a time where someone like me can go from being legally blind to having their eyesight back, all with the advances in modern science and technology. The things that used to be just myth and legend, the thing of soothsayers and wizards, right? Giving someone their sight back, giving sight back to the blind is something that science can do today. And I'm grateful to be alive at a period in history where that is possible. And I hope that you are as well, because it is a great time to be alive and the future is all around us. So with that, I just want to say thank you all so much for attending. And we're going to hop it open to questions now. But if anyone has any questions, please feel free to toss them in the chat. And we will take them now. Don't be shy. Also, if you want to come off mute now, you're more than welcome to. And I will also be checking the live stream to see what questions we have. So once again, I'll just say, if you enjoyed the presentation, we are at Indiana Sciences and at Science Night 1. And thank you all for coming very much. And we'll open it up for questions. So so James, this one's for you. I got one from the live stream. It says, have you heard of C.G. Jung's Flying Saucers, a modern myth of things seen in the sky, about how and why elves, dragons, leprechauns, etc. Have been set up by more scientific creatures?
I haven't heard that, and now I definitely want to check it out. But since we are talking about things where we learn things about cryptids, I have to plug the book where I got most of this information from, that I'm going to just unblur my background and you can see what's happening behind me so that this actually there. The Unidentified is where I got so much of this information from Colin Dickey here. So I will take the recommendation that was just given to me and give you that information of the Unidentified.
Awesome. Let's see what other questions we got coming in on the front. So we got another one from the live stream. So I think the question is, since my background's in machine learning AI, like are the robots going to take over, right? Is it game over for humanity? And what I would say on that front is that AI, what we consider AI today, artificial intelligence, is really a tool like anything else that we have. You can take these algorithms in artificial intelligence and machine learning and use them for very nefarious, bad, unproductive things, right? You can create very kind of scary viruses and weapons, digital weapons that can disable whole countries' power infrastructure. They can destroy nuclear centrifuges, right? Really nasty stuff. But it's a technology just like anything else we've developed, right? The nuclear bomb, the idea of splitting the atom can be either the nuclear bomb, one of the most destructive weapons we've ever created, or it can be a nuclear power plant, one of the cleanest and most sustainable sources of information, power that we can create, right? Same thing with winning the Nobel Prize for dynamite. That gives us one of the most powerful construction tools that we've ever had to really advance where humans are able to build and to move. It also gives us the foundation for most of the conventional weapons that we have in society, right? So I would say these tools that are in artificial intelligence and machine learning won't destroy us unless we deliberately set them up to destroy us. So I think we're honestly really in a similar period as we were maybe during the Cold War or the nuclear age, where, if we choose to blow ourselves up, hopefully we can get ourselves into space quick enough so that we can survive that. But in all reality, it's really up to us to leverage these tools for the great potential they have to give us a better tomorrow, and not let them be used to really to screw things up for us too bad. So I guess that's my answer on that. So
What if I do a quick counterpoint / devil's advocate to that? So I have in the past talked to somebody called Athena Adkipis on my podcast, who hypothesized that things like the smartphone, and specifically like Twitter, that has gamified our attention span, has kind of already taken over. So maybe the robots have already won, and we're already slaves to technology in that instance.
So I won't argue with that. I think, really the idea of tricking our reward centers, our dopamine responses, and giving us the more and more positive reinforcement for doing an activity, right? Pretty powerful tool, but at the same time that we can create a tool that does that. So you think about social media algorithms that really pull our attention and draw us in, right? We can create systems like hit science fiction for a second, more popular Jarvis out of Iron Man, right? A tool that increases our productivity exponentially, right? It allows us to offboard the things that we can do and create, and really gives us a new level of potential. For every Candy Crush, TikTok, Facebook feed thing that you can think of, you can get a different perspective of the productivity gains through things like a Jarvis, digital assistants, pocket assistants, I think is what they're called in from our talk yesterday from Dick Tracy and stuff. But yeah, I would say there's two sides to that coin, a positive and negative. And I'm one who I never count us monkeys out of it, right? We are very smart primates. And if we do get to lull, I think you see that we are really good at, doing the 2001: A Space Odyssey, taking the bone of the elephant and crushing the thing that is causing us to be too distracted. So I've got hope, right? But I'm inherently optimistic. So, well, cool. So I think if anybody has any other questions and want to toss them in the chat, please do. We've got a couple minutes left here. We're going till 8:30. But I'll definitely say it's been great having you all on here. It's great as always having these presentations and really getting to share the science that we're all so passionate about with you. You can follow us on @Indiana Sciences. We have a book club that we run. We're called Books, Booze, and Brains, where we read a book that has a science undertone, and we bring an expert in that book's field to lead a conversation with us each month. You can watch that on our live stream as well. And I think just before we hop out, James, you want to give another plug for Science Night so that folks can know what that's all about, because it is a great podcast to check out.
Yeah. Always plug your stuff, right? So yeah, we're sci-nights.com. The podcast, the theme of the podcast is talking to scientists in an effort to like humanize them and bring them down to our level. You know, I guess technically I'm also a scientist because I work in science, but you know, I like to think of myself as the everyman in the group. And we talk to people involved with science to see how they got that position, how they do their work and the science that they're doing, in an effort to make them all more approachable. Because hey, if we make the scientists more approachable, then maybe the science itself gets a little bit more approachable. And you know, we try to do fun things too. There's an episode where I talk about Alfred Wallace, who really fits in well with the early science fiction that you're talking about. You know, he was one of the grandfathers of natural selection, but he also had like some crazy ideas about Mars and some pseudoscience and that kind of stuff. So, you know, we try to have fun on the podcast as well. So anyway, that is sci-night.com. Or at Science Night 1, because I can't get at Science Night to just give me his handle anymore.
Getting those stagnant social media handles, that's a tough one. Well, that's our time. It's 8:30. Thank you all so much for joining us. Please have a great evening. Enjoy the rest of your Gen Con. And as always, you know, find some wonder, learn some science. Thanks, everybody.